Honesty is not a trait that it can exist on its own. The word is a noun that refers to an entity, quality, state, action, or concept. Whether describing a trait of character or expressing a property of strength, integrity is always related to something else. However it is used, an essential quality of integrity is its role in describing completeness and soundness for what it refers to. As applied to people, integrity is the quality of being honest and having strong principles. By extension, integrity implies that any organization of people is more vital when honesty and a striving towards principles is promulgated for the good of the whole. And these attributes are a source of pride for we Americans. We like to believe we define our character as rugged individuals who, by sheer force of will and honest fair play, carve out for ourselves and our families a superior way of life that attracts other such people to form a more perfect union governed by fairly applied laws. James Burke wrote a book in 1985 called The Day the Universe Changed. In that book, Burke describes how seemingly small, random events or isolated moments can radically change our understanding of ourselves and the world around us. And I believe that such a moment occurred on July 27th, 2016, after the Republican National Convention had concluded. My wife, Carol, and I had watched an interview with former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, and CNN's Allison Camerata. And we were horrified to hear Gingrich explain what we now all understand as alternative truth. When confronted with the fact that crime in the United States had decreased, he insisted that facts don't matter as much as feelings about crime. He said, "The current view is that liberals have a whole set of statistics which theoretically might be right, but it's not where human beings are. People are frightened. As a political candidate, I'll go with how people feel, and I'll let you go with the theoreticians." I believe that was the instant that heralded the death of truth and the political weaponization of fear in our country. It is when temptation overtook our national ethos. We succumbed to fear and we ran willingly into the darkness of disenfranchisement, supremacy, and othering. We've been damaged by the false narrative of exceptionalism that denies our actual past and obscures our present. Our nation is imperiled because many of us are willing to sacrifice integrity and the rule of law for authoritarian power. Democracies operate on fact, science, and objectivity, along with law. And when there's no basis for action save feelings, there's no democracy. We knew that. But we abandoned our highest path because a messy democracy became too complicated for some to bear. Newt Gingrich and his ilk smashed our Achilles heel to herd us into temptation and usher us into an era of darkness. The events of January 6th, 2021 may have sealed our fate. As you know, this is when armed insurrectionists stormed our nation's capital in an attempt to decertify the election results of 2020 and to overthrow our government. They did this because of a fallacious belief that Donald Trump won the election, which was stolen from him. At this moment, surveys reveal that a third of Americans believe the lie that Biden's election is illegitimate. And recently, a poll came out showing that 61% of Republicans believe in what is now called the Great Race Replacement theory. They're determined to put Trump back in the White House in 2024, no matter what the election results are at the time. They're encouraged by anti-democratic laws in many states that now ensure that outcomes of elections will be certified by partisans. Not only are the laws designed to guarantee such an outcome, but increasingly, people convinced that the last election was stolen are running for offices that control elections in many states. Now, it's alarming that 52% of Republicans who responded to CBS News YouGov poll said that GOP candidates must put showing loyalty to Trump ahead of November's nationwide elections. Does this sound like the behavior and opinions of loving Americans or authoritarians? The reality is that study after study confirms that a great many Americans have succumbed to what is described as the Trump effect. Matthew C. McWilliams, the author of On Fascism, 12 Lessons from American History, writes about this. He wrote this in an article for Politico published in September 2020. When activated by fear, authoritarian-leaning Americans are predisposed to trade civil liberties for strongman solutions to secure law and order, and they're ready to strip civil liberties from those defined as the other, a far cry from the image of America as a country built on a shared commitment to liberty and democratic government. They're more likely to agree that our country should be governed by a strong leader who doesn't have to bother with Congress or elections. They're more likely to support limiting the freedom of the press and agree that the media is the enemy of the people rather than a valuable independent institution. They are also more likely to think the president should have the power to limit the voice and vote of opposition parties, while believing that those who disagree with them are a threat to our country. American authoritarians fear diversity. They're more likely to agree that increasing racial, religious, and ethnic diversity is a clear and present threat to national security. They're more fearful of people of other races and agree with the statement that sometimes other groups must be kept in their place. McWilliams describes people needing to be activated by fear, and this is why the current replacement theory produced by wealthy white nationalists to enter the mainstream is so significantly corrosive. Left to itself, this so-called theory has rightly remained in the fringes until 2014. Put a pin in this. I'll get back to that in a moment. The thing I wish to emphasize is that fear activates authoritarianism and white supremacy. If you can't argue with fact or change minds through democratic processes, then simply tell an audacious big lie that scares people. In fact, tell many of them. Nazis and fascists discovered a century ago the best way to destroy the integrity of a society is to delegitimize its government and institutions. The fact is that authoritarianism cannot be separated from white supremacy and racism in our country. Why do I say that? Well, I point to the insurrectionists who stormed the Capitol with what? Confederate flags, nooses, and other symbols of white supremacy. The Trump effect has induced people to bring into the mainstream lies, white supremacy, and violence. Think about this. The lies, as outrageous, sometimes comical, and always way over the top as they are, have fueled yet more insane lies that seem to be challenged by fewer people. The Trump effect has created a self-sustaining and corrosive environment that allows for a mimetic cascade of pernicious, fear-based lies. And the lies become legitimized precisely because they're so unbelievable. And thus, we're caught in a vicious cycle. Here are some examples of what I'm talking about. According to Ellie Reeve, writing for CNN, the replacement theory that I ask you to put a pin in contends that the entire southern hemisphere is populated with people of color who evolved to be less smart and have more sex than white people, while women evolved to be compliant and conformist. The theory says that Jews trick white women into having babies with people of color, and they trick white men into becoming transgender. And this is all done so that the population becomes less white and easier to control. On May 19th, Candace Taylor, a Republican running in Georgia's gubernatorial race, said, "The First Amendment right, which is our right to worship Jesus freely, that's why we have a country. That's why we have Georgia. That's why we have our founding fathers come over here and destroy American Indians' lives and homes and their lands. They took it. Look at what they went through, the Native Americans, for sacrifice for us to have the freedom that we have today." And in the wake of the leaked Supreme Court draft opinion regarding Roe v. Wade on May 18th, 2022, Catherine Glenn Foster, president of the Americans United for Life campaign group, was summoned by Republicans on the House Judiciary Committee as an expert witness. She told the committee that bodies are thrown in medical waste bins and in places like Washington, D.C., burned to power the lights of the city's homes and streets. Crazy, preposterous, outlandish, right? No. Effective, targeted, purposeful, shrewd, insidious, and successful. These techniques have been perfected to bypass the thinking brain and burrow deep into the amygdala that controls emotions. Some people like Newt Gingrich rightly understand that the political power they seek to acquire and hold cannot be attained by being truthful. Their constituents must be made to feel overwhelmed and rendered powerless by such things as climate change, migration, demographic shifts, and international conflict. What matters is how to control a person's behavior when it comes time to vote. It also matters that people must also be sufficiently threatened into accepting destruction of the democratic process to ensure against change. So as I contemplate integrity and our national character, I believe we suffer from the disadvantage of not facing our racist past. We've been lying to ourselves for so long that our Constitution was written by white propertied men who enfranchised themselves. Women were not exclusively written into the document. Can you say Equal Rights Amendment? And the issue of what to do about Indians and Negroes was kicked down the proverbial historical road for another time. By lying to ourselves for so long, we've set the foundations of our nation without the integrity needed to sustain ourselves. It's time for us to simply tell the truth about all the isms we pretend don't exist. If we can't do that, at least let's not elect people who use lies as a political weapon. Namaste.